Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you have clerk report House Committee Sub 1, please?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 260.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Move for adoption of House Committee Sub 1 to House Bill 260.
Motion made for the adoption of House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. House Committee Substitute 1 is adopted. Gentleman from McCracken.
Yes, sir. Before I speak on House Bill 260, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Allen for a friendly floor amendment.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Allen.
Speaker, would you have the clerk report House Floor Amendment 1?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 1 to House Bill 260.
Gentleman from Allen.
So on page 3, subsection 5, we changed and added the word evaluation and then changed appraisal to assessments, and then at the end of that put USPAP. And so what this does, as an appraiser, we have to abide by USPAP, which is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practices. But PBAs are not normally appraisers by license. So they do evaluations and assessments. An evaluation is not considered in the state of Kentucky an appraisal. If you call me as being a licensed appraiser and tell me you want an evaluation, I'll tell you I can't do that. I have to do an appraisal. Again, PBAs, even though there is a carve-out in the USPAP law that we're governed by as appraisers for assessors and for mass appraising, they do evaluations and assessing. So again, if there's no further questions, I'd ask for adoption.
Motion made for the adoption of House Floor Amendment. Was that 3, gentlemen, again? Floor Amendment 1. House Floor Amendment 1. Is there any discussion? Gentleman from Carter, you want to speak on the bill or the amendment? Bill, okay. Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by voting aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. House Floor Amendment 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Allen.
Back to the gentleman.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I'd like to speak to you about House Bill 260. Over the past several years, there's been an attempt by large retailers to either use or create loopholes to where they can have their properties devalued. And today, House Bill 260 is an attempt to prevent this from happening. When this happens, their property payments go down, their assessments go down, their bills go down, and they take that money to, most of the time, out-of-state corporate headquarters to extend their bottom line. And what this does is it forces our local schools, our jails, our health departments, our local governments, our in my area, the sexual assault centers, the abuse centers, all this to for their revenues to be lowered, and to make up for that, they have to raise their tax assessments, and it falls on the small business owners, the farmers, and the homeowners. And this House bill does several things. First, it prevents the large retailers from exempting improvements such as income-producing lease that adds intrinsic value to the real property. It clarifies that standard appraisal practices must be followed by requiring similar properties to be considered comparable properties. This includes standardized method of size, location, and age. It prohibits the use of vacant properties in comparable sales. Many times large corporations, corporate entities demand that empty buildings in less desirable locations be considered comparable properties, and that drives their multi-million-dollar values down, therefore cheating our local communities. It stipulates that all appraisals meet the minimum applicable appraisal standards established by both IAAO and USPAP. We move that to where it's on a level playing field. House Bill 260 also requires appellants who represent these corporations to be licensed in Kentucky. If you bring an accountant in, they must be licensed in Kentucky. If you bring an attorney in, they must be licensed in Kentucky. If you bring in a real estate broker or appraisal, they must be licensed in Kentucky. And that's in accordance with KRS 382-130. I'm sorry, that's in accordance with KRS statute that's already in place that says if you practice any of these professional standards, you must be licensed in Kentucky. It also conforms to Kentucky's Constitution by defining the purchase price of the real property as stated on the deed as a basis for determining fair cash value, which is required by KRS 382-135. It also prevents PBA officers from taking a property that's listed on the real estate market and attaching that asking price as an appraisal price. That raises the property, and it requires that they cannot use a price on the MLS unless it's a sold figure where a transaction, arm's length transaction, has already taken place. What it does not do, it does not raise assessment values on current properties. It does not change or take away the right of a taxpayer to appeal their property assessment, and it does not require the property owners to provide leases to the PBA. The bottom line is House Bill 260 closes narrow loopholes or prevents the creation of these loopholes to prevent large commercial retailers from lowering their assessment values. House Bill 260 requires the commercial assessments be aligned with our state constitutional obligation of being valued at the fair cash value. It also protects small business owners, farmers, and homeowners from having to pay higher property taxes due to the loss of revenue from lowering the larger corporations' taxes. You know, I feel like we as legislators, we are voted on to protect our constituents from being forced to pay higher taxes on their homes because the large, mostly out-of-state corporations want to reduce their tax obligations. With that, I ask for passage of House Bill 260 as amended by House Floor Amendment 1 and House Committee Sub 1. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.